The teenager raised the aluminum bat high, aiming straight for the trembling German shepherd at his feet, and gave the little girl a cruel choice: step aside or watch her dog die. But the small, fragile girl didn't run. She threw herself over Brave, her thin arms wrapping around his battered body as tears streaked down her freckled face. She squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the blow meant to break them both. What she didn't see was the battle-scarred soldier stepping out from the line of trees behind them, and the man who emerged, silent, wounded, carved by war, wasn't there to negotiate. He was there to stop the swing before it ever reached her. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, and if this story touches your heart, please subscribe for more. The late autumn air drifted cold through Red Maple Field, carrying the scent of dry leaves and the distant echo of children long gone home. Marin Glenn, an 11-year-old girl with a slight frame and soft, freckled skin, sat curled on a white wooden bench whose paint had begun to peel at the edges. Her blonde hair, thin, light, always escaping its loose ponytail, caught every breeze as if trying to drift away from her small shoulders. She held herself in that way children do. When they've learned too early that the world can be loud and unpredictable, her arms wrapped around her middle, knees pulled close, making herself into the smallest version possible. She wasn't reading or humming or even watching the leaves fall. She was simply sitting, quietly, tensely, as if listening for a warning only she could hear. Beside her sat Brave, a 4-year-old German shepherd with a strong, noble build and fur patterned in deep black and warm tan. His muzzle was sharp, ears tall, and his amber eyes had a constant vigilance uncommon in a family dog. Brave had been trained by Marin's late father, a rescue diver whose life had been marked by courage and whose death during a winter storm had carved something invisible out of the family he left behind. Because Brave was the last trace of that legacy, he watched the world with the seriousness of a guardian who understood his role. He wasn't lying down lazily or sniffing at the grass like other dogs that came to Red Maple Field. Instead, he sat pressed against Marin's right side, chest still, shoulders stiff, looking at every moving shape like a soldier assessing a battlefield. Marin loved him with a devotion that was larger than her small frame could hold. Brave was the only living thing that made her feel unafraid. But even with him there, she kept glancing toward the old playground, a fading structure of blue paint and rusting metal, where swings creaked even when the wind was quiet. Her eyes always paused at the shadowed space under the slide, as if expecting someone to crawl out from it. Each time she looked, her breathing changed slightly, tightening, and Brave responded with a small shift of his weight, like a shield adjusting to cover her blind spots. Her fear wasn't the explosive, theatrical kind adults assume children have. It was slow, silent, a fear that grew in corners. It came from losing a mother too young to remember her voice, from losing a father too young to understand death, from moving into her grandmother's house and learning that sometimes the world doesn't offer explanations, just absences. She didn't talk about any of it. Children rarely do. Instead, she held her fear in her shoulders, in the way she didn't trust wide open spaces, in the way she startled when someone laughed too loudly behind her. Brave knew all this. Brave understood in ways that animals just do. Gareth Lind entered the scene like a shadow becoming a shape. He was a man in his late 30s, tall, with a lean, rangy build shaped by years of missions that required speed more than brute strength. His face carried the angles of someone who had lived too often on the edge: sharp jaw, faint crease across the brow, and dark stubble that grew unevenly along his jawline after an accident had left a thin, pale scar weaving down his left cheek. His hair, dark brown, almost black, was cut short but never styled, as if he had long forgotten what vanity was supposed to feel like. He wore a gray running shirt, sweat dampened at the chest and collarbone, and black athletic pants that still carried the disciplined look of a man who lived by routine even when his career had been forcibly paused. Gareth had once been a special operations agent with a reputation for precision, calm judgment, and an almost unsettling ability to read danger before it manifested. But a rescue mission gone wrong, a blast that sent him tumbling into debris, had left him with a fractured shoulder, a damaged knee, and a new, unwelcome understanding of failure. His recovery was physical, yes, but also deeply internal. He walked his mornings through Red Maple Field because the quiet there didn't demand answers he wasn't ready to give. Yet even in his damaged state, the habits of vigilance clung to him like a second shadow. He saw things before they unfolded. He noticed shifts in posture, the tension in hands, the wrong kind of silence. Which is why, when he slowed his jog near the old oak at the edge of the field and saw Marin and Brave on the bench, something pulled him to a halt. It wasn't the girl alone. Many children sat in this park after school. It wasn't even the dog. Though Brave's posture radiated the rigid focus of a trained protector, it was the combination of the two. The subtle signs that something was wrong. Brave's unmoving tail, the tiny tremor in Marin's exhale, the way she held her backpack close to her stomach like a shield. Gareth followed her line of sight to the playground and felt his instincts tighten like a noose. There was no movement, no sound, but he knew the look on the girl's face. He had seen it before in disaster zones, in children waiting for a parent who wasn't coming back, in civilians who didn't scream when danger arrived because they had already been living with fear too long. He didn't move closer, not yet. Approaching a frightened child required softness, and softness was something Gareth had forgotten how to speak. Still, he stayed there under the oak tree, watching without being a threat, measuring the space, studying the field. A quiet protectiveness rose within him, not out of heroism, but something far more weary and human. He didn't want to walk away from this, not from the girl with the scared eyes, not from the dog who seemed to be holding the world together for her. Something was wrong, something was coming, and Gareth Lind, even broken, was someone who could not ignore the warning. At the edge of Red Maple Field, the air thickened, the leaves turned in a restless whisper, and for the first time that afternoon, Marin Glen looked toward the oak tree and saw him watching. And the moment their eyes met, Gareth understood. He was not the only one sensing an approaching storm. The next afternoon, beneath an overcast sky that pressed low over Red Maple Field like a heavy lid, Marin Glen tried to pretend the world was quieter than it felt inside her small chest. She stood on the damp grass near the central lawn, her thin sweater pulled close to her ribs as she tossed a bright orange ball for Brave. The 4-year-old German shepherd, muscular, sharp-muzzled, with intelligent amber eyes, bounded across the green space with practiced precision, even though his steps never drifted too far from Marin's orbit. His loyalty was visible in every movement, in the way his ears flicked toward her, in how he returned the ball gently into her palm, in the protective tension that barely loosened, even in moments meant to be playful. That afternoon, Marin wore the same faded jeans and lavender sneakers she always wore to the park, shoes scuffed from running too fast when afraid, jeans stained at the knees from kneeling beside Brave during thunderstorms. Her blonde ponytail swayed at her shoulders as she bent to pick up the ball. She whispered something to Brave, some small inside joke only two creatures who had survived lost together could understand, before winding up for another throw. But the throw never came. 3 older boys stepped onto the grass like a dark cloud crossing the sun. Carter Vell, Riley Boone, and Hasker Finn were the kind of boys who grew too quickly for their own sense of responsibility. Carter, the unofficial leader at 15, was tall and lean with a messy shock of dark hair and sharp cheekbones that gave him a wolfish look. His brown eyes held a cruelty sharpened over years of learning that fear gets results. Riley was shorter but wiry, with freckles stretching across a narrow nose and a constant mocking grin that never reached his pale blue eyes. Hasker, the broadest of the 3, carried softness beneath his bulk. his round face and downturned eyes suggesting a gentleness buried under the influence of stronger, meaner friends. But that gentleness, like most good things in him, had been pressed thin by the presence of Carter, who relished being the center of gravity in their cruel little orbit. Carter didn't ask for the ball. He simply snatched it from Marin's hand with a speed that made her flinch. His fingers brushed roughly across her knuckles, and he grinned down at her as if pleased by how small she looked in front of him. "Playing babysitter again?" he sneered, lifting the ball above his head. "That mangy dog still your little shadow?" Brave stepped forward, shoulder muscles tightening beneath his thick fur, but he didn't growl, not yet. He only positioned himself half a step in front of Marin, as if drawing a border the boys had no right to cross. Riley chuckled, circling Brave with his hands in his pockets, eyes bright with the thrill of having an audience. "Look at him," Riley said, "all big and tough. Let's see how tough he really is." Without warning, Carter threw the ball far across the lawn, forcing Brave to chase after it. As Brave spun and sprinted toward it, Carter muttered something under his breath, something low, rotten, triumphant. Hasker tried to laugh along, but it came out forced, weak, like he wanted to be anywhere but here. Brave returned, ball in his mouth, tail low, but not submissive, his instincts caught between obedience to Marin and suspicion toward the boys. As soon as Brave came close, Carter lifted his leg and slammed his foot into the dog's chest. The impact sent Brave stumbling backward, paws scraping against the wet blades of grass. His breath hitched in his throat. Marin's scream tore through the air. "Stop! Don't hurt him!" She lunged forward, but Hasker grabbed her wrist, not harshly, but firmly enough to hold her back. His round face tightened with conflict, his grip trembling slightly. He didn't want to be part of this. But he didn't want to oppose Carter either. Brave, knocked down but not defeated, rose again. He did not snap or bite, though his instincts screamed at him to protect the small girl who meant everything to him. Instead, he stepped in front of her, body lowered, ready to absorb whatever came next. Riley sauntered forward and kicked Brave in the ribs. "Seriously? This thing is supposed to be a shepherd?" Riley laughed, shaking his head. "My grandma's cat hits harder." Brave let out a pained grunt, his ribs trembling beneath his fur. Marin fought against Hasker's hold, tears blurring her vision. "Let me go. Brave, Brave, no, please." Riley lifted his foot again, raising it higher this time, aiming cruelly. Brave braced himself, eyes narrowing. It was then that a subtle shift occurred across the field. Gareth Lind, who had gone to a nearby bench to retie the laces of his running shoes, paused mid-knot. His dark hair, damp from exercise, clung to his temples as he slowly straightened his posture. From where he stood, half hidden behind a low hedge, he saw the scene unfold with instant clarity. The lean teenager kicking the dog, the terrified girl pinned by another boy's grip, the shepherd's futile attempts to protect without escalating the violence, the predatory manner of children who had learned too early that hurting others made them feel powerful. Gareth's eyes, slate gray and sharpened by years of reading danger, went cold. The noise of the park faded beneath the pounding of his heart. His recovery doctor had told him he needed calm, needed stillness, needed time to heal the parts of him that had been broken in the blast. But courage and instinct were not things he had ever been able to turn off. When Carter lifted his foot again, aiming a third kick, this time for Brave's neck, Gareth stood up fully. His jaw tightened. The scar on his cheek stretched pale against his skin. His steps, though silent at first, quickened with purpose. Marin finally ripped her wrist free from Hasker's hesitant grasp and flung herself in front of Brave. She wrapped her small arms around his neck, burying her face in his fur. "Stop! Don't hurt him, please!" Carter sneered, raising his leg anyway. "Move, mouse girl. The dog's getting another lesson." Brave let out a low, warning growl, the kind that comes from the deepest part of a shepherd's chest. But he didn't lunge. He wouldn't risk hurting Marin. The kick came, but it never landed. A hand, strong, calloused, precise, closed around Carter's ankle mid-swing. The sudden weight shift caused Carter to lose balance, stumbling sideways. He twisted around, eyes wide. Gareth Lind stood there, tall and cutting a stark figure against the gray afternoon. His lean build was tense beneath his running shirt, muscles coiled like a trained predator. His expression was a mixture of fury and control, a dangerous balance. "That's enough," Gareth said, his voice low, rough, and carrying a stillness that frightened more than shouting ever could. Riley froze. Hasker stepped back instinctively. Carter jerked his leg free, trying to appear unfazed, but fear flickered in his eyes. "Who the hell are you?" Carter spat, though his voice trembled. "A man telling you to walk away," Gareth replied calmly, stepping between the boys and the trembling pair of girl and dog. His tone was controlled, cold, but beneath it lay a promise, a warning sharpened by years of dealing with men far more dangerous than teenage bullies. Carter inhaled sharply, trying to stand tall, but Gareth's presence pressed against the boy's confidence like a weight. Riley shoved his hands in his pockets, eyes darting for exits. Hasker stared at the ground. Gareth crouched beside Brave and gently touched the dog's ribs, checking for damage. Brave leaned into his hand, trusting him instantly. Marin looked up, her tear-streaked face frightened but hopeful. Gareth stood again, taller, darker, more solid than any of the boys expected. "This ends now," he said. The boys stepped back. They had never been hunted before, and for the first time they understood fear. Gareth kept his eyes locked on them until they scattered across the field and disappeared behind the playground's rusting slide. And when he finally turned back to Marin and Brave, he knelt so his voice would reach her gently. "You're safe now," he said, "both of you." But deep inside, he knew this was only the beginning. The moment Marin Glenn planted her small sneakers into the damp grass and threw her arms wide in front of Brave, the air in Red Maple Field seemed to hold its breath. The overcast sky pressed lower, turning the park into a muted cage of gray shadows. Her thin arms trembled, yet she didn't step back. Her blonde ponytail clung to her cheek from the cold wind, and her freckled face, usually flushed with the shy gentleness of a child, was streaked with tears and raw fear. Brave stood behind her, ribs rising and falling unevenly, amber eyes focused despite the pain streaking through his body. His fur, thick and once gleaming, bristled against his spine as his instinct warred with obedience. Trained by her late father, the shepherd knew never to attack unless commanded, but he also knew he could not let her fall alone. Carter Vell watched her like someone watching a weak creature trying to act brave. Tall and thin, with sharp angles in his face, he looked older than 15 in that moment, older in the wrong ways. His messy dark hair stuck to his forehead, and his brown eyes gleamed with something twisted. He slung off his backpack and unzipped it lazily, as though rummaging for a school notebook. Instead, he pulled out a silver aluminum baseball bat, its surface dull and scraped from heavy use. The way he held it, hand firm around the narrow grip, wrist relaxed, suggested Carter had swung this bat at more things than baseballs. Riley Boone stepped closer, his wiry frame hunched slightly, freckles scattered across his cheeks, like dirt on unfinished pottery. His blue eyes darted around the empty park. Not a jogger, not a dog walker, not even a stroller-pushing parent remained. The cold air had driven everyone home, leaving them in an isolated pocket of grass and shadow. "See?" Riley said with a smirk curling one corner of his thin mouth. "No one cares. No one's here. Just do it." Hasker Finn swallowed hard, his round cheeks pale beneath the soft layer of baby fat that still clung to him despite his size. He glanced at Marin, at her trembling frame pressed in front of her limping dog, and something flickered in his dark eyes. Guilt, fear, a conscience being smothered by the weight of loyalty to the wrong friends. Yet he didn't step forward or back. He stayed frozen in place, fists curling and loosening at his sides. Carter's voice rolled low. Move, mouse girl. The mutt gets the lesson first. Marin's feet dug deeper into the grass. No, don't you dare. Her words broke as a sob tore from her throat. Carter raised the bat and drove it hard into Brave's ribs. A hollow thud rang out, the kind of sound only metal hitting bone can make. Brave's cry, sharp, high, heartbreakingly soft, stabbed through the stillness. He collapsed to one knee, breath shuddering, but still angled his body to cover Marin with what strength he had left. Marin screamed, her voice cracking. Stop! Stop, please, please! Stop! Hit me, not him! Her small hands clutched Brave's thick fur, and she bent over him, her back forming a tiny shield against the world. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the next blow. She didn't see Gareth Lind approaching. He had been jogging back toward the open path after tying his shoe, but the scream froze him. His instincts, those hard-wired, battle-sharpened reflexes, triggered before conscious thought did. In 3 strides he was moving fast, silently, cutting across the grass with a predator's gait. His jaw tightened, that pale scar cutting across his cheek, sharpening as the muscles clenched beneath it. The cold wind tugged at his dark hair, but Gareth didn't feel the chill. He felt something else rising, something old, something honed in the wreckage of collapsed buildings and war zones. As he closed in, he took in every detail, Brave trembling but standing guard, Marin shielding him despite her size, Carter lifting the bat again, Riley egging him on, Hasker torn but still complicit. Gareth's gray eyes hardened, narrowing into that familiar, razor-focused expression of a man stepping into danger, fully aware of the stakes. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. His presence, his silence, his controlled fury bled into the space like a warning. Carter swung, and Gareth's hand shot forward, closing around the aluminum bat mid-arc. His grip was ironclad. The bat stopped with such abrupt force that Carter stumbled. The color drained from the boy's face as he turned, realizing the arm that halted his cruelty was not another kid's, but that of a hardened grown man whose aura felt colder than the wind. Gareth's voice, when it came, was low and trained to cut through chaos. That's enough. Riley took a step back, suddenly aware that Gareth was not just some passerby. There was something in the man's lean, muscled frame, in the scars half hidden beneath his shirt, in the stillness that radiated from him, something that whispered of violence held in check, something dangerous. Hasker looked at the ground, shame creeping up his neck. Carter tried to yank the bat from Gareth's grip, but quickly realized he couldn't. Gareth's hand didn't budge. His knuckles didn't even whiten. The boy's bravado faltered, replaced with the first hint of fear. What? Carter started, voice tight. Gareth wrenched the bat from his hands with a single turn of the wrist. The metal clattered to the ground. Then he stepped between Carter and Marin, placing his body like a wall. He knelt briefly to check Brave, running practiced fingers along the dog's ribs with surprising gentleness. Brave's breathing was shallow, his pain evident, but he licked Gareth's hand, recognizing the calm authority of someone who meant no harm. Marin lifted her tear-streaked face, eyes wide with confusion and hope. Gareth looked at her briefly and gave a single nod, reassurance without words. He stood again, taller now, towering, over the boys. His voice stayed low, controlled, but every word vibrated with steel. This is how it ends. You walk away, now. Carter swallowed, throat bobbing, trying to keep his pride intact. You can't tell us what... You're done. Gareth stepped forward once, just once, but that was enough. Riley grabbed Carter's sleeve. Let's go, man. There was no humor left in his voice now. Hasker mumbled, barely audible, sorry, though he didn't say who he was apologizing to. Carter glared at Gareth for a heartbeat, one long, shaky heartbeat, then turned on his heel and stormed away, Riley close behind. Hasker trailed after them with his shoulders rounded inward, weighed down by the sudden realization of what they had nearly done. Silence returned, a heavy, trembling silence. Gareth dropped to one knee again beside Brave, examining him more carefully. "He needs to be checked," he said, his voice finally softening. "He took a bad hit." Marin nodded, wiping her tears with the sleeve of her sweater. He tried to protect me." "He did," Gareth said, running a steady hand along Brave's neck. "And you protected him." Marin's voice cracked. "I didn't know what else to do." "You did enough," Gareth whispered. As he stood, he looked across the field where the boys had disappeared, a dark tension settling in his chest. Something about the way Carter looked back, something cold, calculating, told Gareth this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The wind rustled through the bare branches overhead, scattering red maple leaves across the ground like drops of fading fire. And Gareth Lynn knew, with the clarity of a man who had seen storms before, that the worst of it hadn't yet begun. The wind pressed colder against red maple field, as if the entire park exhaled after holding its breath too long. The late autumn sky dimmed into a washed-out silver, and the rustling of the red maple leaves filled the silence that followed the halted swing of the aluminum bat. Carter Vell stood frozen, his thin, angular body tensed, as Gareth Lynn's hand clamped around the bat's shaft. Gareth didn't move with the clumsy aggression of an angry adult. He moved with the sharp decisiveness of someone trained to end chaos before it could bloom. His grip, steady and impossibly firm, stopped Carter's swing mid-air like the strike of a metal trap. The dark stubble on Gareth's jaw cast harsh shadows across the scar that ran down his left cheek, making him look more carved from stone than flesh. His gray eyes, already cold in their natural state, had hardened into something glacial. "Enough," he said. The word came out low, steady, not a shout, but a command stitched into bone. Carter's eyes widened, his fingers twitched around the bat, but Gareth's presence sucked every ounce of bravado from him. His messy dark hair clung to his forehead from sweat, though the air was cold. He tried to yank the bat free, but Gareth twisted his wrist with a controlled motion, enough to send a flash of pain up Carter's arm, but not enough to injure him. Carter hissed and dropped the bat, stumbling backward. Riley Boone took a step away, his wiry frame shrinking. The freckles on his face seemed to darken, his smirk collapsing under the weight of fear. He shoved his hands deep into his pockets, shoulders creasing inward. Hasker Finn, round-cheeked and visibly shaken, stared at Gareth's hand resting lightly, but strategically, at his wrist. Hasker's breath came shallow, his entire body trembling like a frightened animal. "You boys were one swing away from killing something, or someone," Gareth said, his voice never rising. "Go home, now, and if I see any of you near this girl or this dog again, I won't just be calling the police. I'll be calling your parents, your schools, and anyone else who needs to hear the truth." He didn't need to raise his voice. The quiet certainty, the unshakable authority. It was worse for the boys than yelling. Carter opened his mouth to retort, but nothing came out. His throat bobbed in a tight swallow. Riley and Hasker tugged him back, and together they scrambled away, stumbling in their haste to flee. By the time they disappeared behind the rusted slide, the sound of their retreating footsteps was swallowed by the wind. The moment they were gone, Marin collapsed to her knees beside Brave. The German shepherd, his thick fur trembling, tried to rise but winced at the motion. His amber eyes, those disciplined, loyal eyes, shifted toward Gareth even as he tried to calm Marin with a soft nuzzle of her cheek. Gareth crouched down beside them, lowering himself with care. His lean, battle-worn frame moved, stiffly in the cold, his injured knee aching faintly, but he didn't allow discomfort to touch his expression. He ran his calloused fingers gently along Brave's ribcage, his touch precise but tender. Brave flinched once, but when Gareth murmured a steadying sound, something between a hush and a breath of reassurance, the dog relaxed just enough to let him examine the bruised area. Gareth's hands carried the memory of countless rescues, countless wounded souls pulled from places far harsher than this quiet park. He had once steadied the hands of a child buried under rubble, had lifted men twice his size while ignoring the blood on his own limbs. Even now, the way he checked Brave felt practiced, not clinical, but deeply instinctive. "He's hurting," Gareth said quietly, "but he's strong. Nothing's broken." Marin, still shaking, wiped her tears with the back of her sleeve. Her thin blonde ponytail was tangled from the struggle, strands of hair sticking to her wet cheeks. She clung to Brave's fur as if afraid he might vanish if she loosened her grip. "Chu-oi, why did you help us?" she asked, voice soft and shaky. Gareth looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the fear flickering behind her blue-green eyes, the exhaustion, the quiet courage that shouldn't have been required of someone her age. He saw the small girl who had lost too much, who clung to a dog because he was the last piece of a father who had died saving strangers. Gareth inhaled slowly. "Because," he said, "sometimes the smallest people carry the biggest courage." Marin blinked, her breath catching. Brave, still pressed against her, lifted his head and gently licked Gareth's hand. It was a simple gesture, but Gareth felt something shift inside himself. Some old, aching part that had been quiet since the explosion that nearly ended his life. He gently stroked Brave's head once before standing, but Gareth didn't leave. He scanned the park with the same sharp, sweeping perception he had honed during years of missions. The rusted swing set, the empty sandbox, the distant benches scattered along the tree line, and there, subtle, almost unnoticeable movement behind one of the thicker oaks. Not a child running, not a stray toe, something heavier, someone watching. Gareth's shoulders tensed, but he didn't let it show. His breath slowed, his heartbeat steadied. "Do you two come here often?" he asked, though the question had more weight than casual conversation. Marin nodded. "Every day after school. Brave likes it here." Gareth crouched again, his voice low so only she could hear. "Listen to me. Those boys, they weren't just playing. They meant to hurt him." He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "And hurt you if you got in their way." He didn't mention the shadow behind the tree. Not yet. Marin's fingers tightened around Brave's collar. They've bothered other kids too." Gareth's jaw clenched. "Not anymore, I promise." He offered her his hand to help her up. Marin hesitated, then placed her small, cold fingers into his palm. Gareth pulled her carefully to her feet. Brave rose too, though unsteadily, pressing his body against Marin's leg for support. Gareth kept one eye on the trees until the subtle movement vanished. "Let's get him home," Gareth said. "He needs rest, and you need to be safe." Marin nodded. She took one halting step, then stopped and turned back toward him. "Chu, are you coming with us?" Gareth paused. He looked at the empty field, at the shadows, at the fading footprints of the three boys, and at the place where someone had stood watching. "Yes," he said at last, voice firm, "I'll walk you." As they left the field, Gareth walked slightly behind and to the side, a protective angle. Brave limped but stayed close to Marin's heel. The cold wind cut through the branches above them, and the park grew darker as clouds swallowed the last pale light of day. Somewhere behind them, unseen, a twig snapped. Gareth turned his head just slightly. He didn't see anyone, but he knew something had changed tonight, something that wouldn't let the violence end here. The soldier had stepped out of the trees, and now the shadows were shifting in response. The morning sun rose softly over Red Maple Field, its pale light brushing the dew-soaked grass like a gentle hand, smoothing away the harshness of the night before. A faint golden haze lingered above the playground, where every slide and swing still held the echo of yesterday's fear. On a stone bench near the maple grove, Marin Glenn sat quietly with Brave's heavy head resting on her lap. His thick black and tan fur gleamed faintly under the bandage wrapped around his bruised ribs, and though he breathed slowly, there was a stubborn strength in the way his amber eyes watched the world. Marin stroked his ear in small circles, her fingers still trembling but no longer from terror. She wore the same oversized sweater she always did on chilly mornings, the sleeves swallowing her hands, her blonde ponytail slightly crooked from rushing out of the house too fast. For once, she wasn't afraid of being alone. Footsteps approached from the gravel path. Gareth Lind appeared through the soft morning light, his tall, angular frame moving with a stiffness that came from old scars and colder memories. His dark hair was slightly damp, as if he had washed it quickly before coming, and the stubble along his jaw made him look even more like the haunted soldier he was. He carried a small, wrapped bundle under one arm and a bright red rubber ball in the other. Without a word, he lowered himself onto the bench beside Marin. His movements were careful, measured, the kind of stillness that came from someone who had learned long ago how to avoid startling the wounded, whether they were dogs, children, or men on battlefields. He unwrapped the small bundle, a compact canine first aid kit, a whispered remnant of his days training rescue dogs alongside their handlers. Brave lifted his head slightly, ears tilted toward Gareth. The big dog's injured side rose and fell unevenly, and Gareth reached out with gentle precision, pressing 2 fingers lightly against Brave's ribcage. "Slow breath," Gareth murmured softly, "just like last night." Brave obeyed, as if recognizing that this man's voice carried authority, but never harm. Marin watched intently, her blue-green eyes following Gareth's steady hands. The trust she showed him was quiet, but unmistakable. Gareth guided Brave through a series of shallow breathing exercises designed to ease muscle pressure. His expression shifted as he worked, part concentration, part something softer. Perhaps relief, perhaps determination, perhaps the small, unexpected sense of belonging that had crept into him since the moment he grabbed Carter's bat out of the air. "Does it hurt him a lot?" Marin asked, her voice small but steadier than it had been in days. "Some," Gareth answered honestly, "but he's tougher than he looks." Brave, catching the tone of reassurance, pushed his cold nose into Gareth's wrist. Gareth huffed a small laugh, barely a breath really, but it softened the hard lines of his face. He reached behind him, grabbed the new ball, and rolled it lightly across the grass. Brave watched it, ears pricking just a little, tail giving one slow thump of interest. "That's a good sign," Gareth said. For a moment, everything was still. The 3 of them framed by sunlight and drifting leaves. No shadows behind trees, no boys with cruel laughs, no memories sharp enough to cut. Then Marin asked the question that had been lodged in her chest since yesterday. "Will you come back?" She didn't try to hide the worry in her eyes. She didn't pretend she wasn't afraid of losing help or company or the strange guardian who had stepped out of the trees when no one else had. Gareth looked not at her but at Brave first. The dog raised his head fully, ears alert, eyes locked onto Gareth as if he were evaluating the answer as well. There was something knowing in Brave's gaze, something that reminded Gareth of the dogs he'd trained years ago, the ones who sensed a man's intent before he even spoke it aloud. "Yes," Gareth said at last, "I'll come back, at least until I know this place is really safe for both of you." There was no dramatics, no oath sworn in heroic tones, just quiet certainty, the kind that meant more than any flourish. Brave seemed to accept the vow before Marin even did. He shifted his weight and reached out with one large paw, placing it directly on top of Gareth's boot, as if sealing an agreement between soldiers. A dog's handshake, solemn and sincere. Gareth didn't move his foot. Instead, he let Brave's paw remain there, resting against the worn leather of his shoe, and something in his eyes softened further, something warm enough to push back the cold that had lived there for years. Marin let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Relief dissolved some of the tension in her small shoulders. The morning no longer felt like the aftermath of danger. It felt like the beginning of something new. "Can we play with the new ball now?" she asked, voice timid but hopeful. Gareth rose to his feet, brushing off his jeans. Only if Brave wants to. Brave, as if understanding his cue, pushed himself up. His stance was slightly uneven, but there was determination in the way he tried to plant each paw firmly. Gareth tossed the ball in a gentle arc across the grass. Brave limped after it, not fast, but with pride, head held high. Marin clapped softly, her laughter light and nervous at first, then freer. She ran after Brave, calling his name, her hair catching the sunlight like threads of gold. Gareth stayed a few steps behind them, arms crossed loosely, watching, guarding. A soldier on duty, but not out of obligation, out of choice. The shadow he had sensed last night had not reappeared this morning, but he remained alert. The boys might return, or whoever had lingered behind the oak tree might step forward next time. Danger didn't vanish just because the sun was out. But now, watching Marin throw the ball for Brave, watching the big dog limp proudly through the golden grass, it was enough. More than enough. As Brave returned with the ball in his mouth, he stopped beside Gareth, pressing his head gently against the man's hand, as if to say something only a dog could say. I trust you. I will stand with you. Don't leave us behind. Gareth rested his palm on Brave's head. I'm not going anywhere, he whispered, a promise meant for fur and heartbeats, and little girls who had been brave long before he arrived. The morning sun warmed the park, glinting softly off the red maple leaves, and for the first time in a long time, all three of them felt what it meant to belong, to a moment, to each other, to a world where kindness was still possible. In every quiet corner of our world, God places small miracles. Some come with soft footsteps, some with wagging tails, and some with the courage of a child who refuses to give up. What happened in Red Maple Field wasn't just luck. It was a reminder that even in the coldest seasons of life, God sends the right people, the right guardians, and the right signs exactly when we need them most. Brave stood up for Marin when no one else did, and Gareth stepped into their story like a light breaking through the clouds. That is how God works. Quietly, tenderly, through everyday heroes we often overlook. Maybe you too have moments when you feel small, tired, or unseen. Maybe you've had days when the world feels heavier than your shoulders can carry. But remember this, you are never alone. God watches, God listens, and God moves through acts of kindness, sometimes through a stranger, sometimes through a friend, and sometimes through a loyal animal who loves us more than we understand. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who might need hope today. Leave a comment below. Write Amen if you believe God still works through ordinary people to create extraordinary miracles. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow so you never miss another story that warms the soul and reminds us that faith is alive in everyday life. May God bless you, protect your home, guide your family, and place His angels around everyone you love. May He give you the courage of little Marin, the loyalty of Brave, and the strength of Gareth when the shadows grow long. Amen.